Ukrainian soldiers are reuniting with family and friends after the 8-month-long Russian occupation. The people of Kherson are celebrating the liberation of their city, singing patriotic songs and climbing to the tops of buildings to hoist the Ukrainian flag. But Kherson is facing challenging humanitarian conditions. Large parts of the city are without electricity and running water. There are also reports of landmines and other hazards left behind by Russian troops. But Zelensky says efforts are now being made to return the city to normalcy. Here's what he told the G20 summit that was earlier this morning. Watch.
It is like, for example, D-Day, the landing of the Allies in Normandy. It was not yet a final point in the fight against evil, but it already determined the entire further course of events. If the victory will be ours in any case, and we are sure of it, then shouldn't we try to implement our formula for peace to save thousands of lives and protect the world from further destabilization?
Zelensky also outlining a peace proposal which includes the end to nuclear threats, more food and energy security, prisoner swaps, and a full withdrawal by Russia. Is this the beginning of the end of the war, as President Zelensky says? Let's discuss now. I want to bring in CNN's chief international correspondent, Clarissa Ward. Good morning to you there. How significant is Zelensky's proposed peace plan to the G20?
Well, I would have to say it is obviously coming from a place of buoyancy and exuberance after the taking of Kherson or the liberation of Kherson. The demands are maximalist. There isn't a huge amount in this 10-point peace plan that the Russians are likely to say, okay, we have something we can start with here. So it's not that the demands are sort of, outlandish in any way. They really make a lot of sense, and they pertain to hugely important issues that affect the whole world, like food security, energy security, nuclear security, as well as demanding that Russia withdraw its forces and that there be a cessation of hostilities. But in terms of how realistic it is to get the Russians to come to the negotiating table and use this as a starting draft, that is probably more of a long shot, because the Russians will obviously be wanting to see more extractions, or at least some concessions that they can take away. At this stage, though, guys, I don't think that the Ukrainians have any interest in making those concessions.
Yeah. Right, and that's critical to all of this as the winter comes, right, which could completely change the game. And President Biden is meeting with world leaders at the G20, hoping to really get them aligned. Can something significant come out of the G20 that would really aid Ukraine at this point in this, Clarissa?
It's a really tough one, Poppy, honestly, because at the end of the day, what you're hearing from U.S. officials, we've heard some in the U.S. military say, now is the time for Ukraine to really take stock and sit down and think about what a peace plan or what some kind of a negotiated settlement would look like. Other officials in the U.S. administration are saying that's really not our place in the U.S. or in the White House to be dictating to the Ukrainians what the terms should look like or when they should sit down. Ukraine right now, understandably, is not in the mood to negotiate. They've lost too much. They've just taken back Kherson. This is a huge strategic and symbolic humiliation for the Russians. It was the only regional capital and the largest city that they've taken since the beginning of the invasion back in February. At the same time, while you have Zelensky talking about D-Day and saying that it's clear the trajectory of the war in the sense that the Russians can't win, President Putin also understands for his own political survival, he can't lose. And so what the Russians are banking on at this stage is that they can drag out or protract this conflict as long as they can and make it as painful as they can, not just for the Ukrainians, but for the Western countries that are backing Ukraine. And as you head into the winter, as you head into the recession, they're hoping that that will sort of, push the Ukrainians, that there will be more sort of Ukraine's supporters in the West pushing them to go to the negotiating table. But at this stage, I don't see that happening overnight.
And Clarissa, we're seeing such triumphant voices, reaction coming out of Kherson, where, it's been a long 8 months for these Ukrainians so far, but we're also getting a better picture of the torture and the hell that they have been living through in this Russian occupation.
That's right. And it's such an important thing, I think, Caitlin, to underscore for our viewers. This is victory, and victory, as you can see in those scenes of jubilation, is a beautiful thing, but it's also grim. because it is also now the beginning of the sort of unpacking of the trauma, of the horrors of what happened, of people who were tortured, who were beaten. One man allegedly for just spray painting, glory be to Ukraine on a bus stop. So the people of Kherson, many of them have lived through things that are unthinkable. And they are now living in a city that has had no electricity, that probably won't have electricity for several more months. And they're going into a winter that promises to be brutally cold, as the winter often is, under continued bombardment, strategic targeting of Ukraine's critical civilian infrastructure. And so while this is a moment for Ukraine to celebrate, it is still painful, and there are still many challenges ahead.